Hello and welcome to the Recreation to Recreation podcast, the show where we explore the stories of people who have turned the activity that they love into positive change for our world. My name is Jen, and I'll be your sidekick on this adventure as we treasure hunt for gems of insight and wisdom while exploring the planet with our inspiring guests. For today's adventure, we're heading to the USA and beyond with Lynnea to explore her world of dinosaurs, representation, and following your dreams. Hi, Lynnea. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to exploring today. And I feel like working in paleontology and focusing on dinosaurs is one of those key childhood things that you never lose. Being an astronaut,
Mhm.
dinosaurs, marine biology, those are kind of like the three things that we as humans are maybe always going to be fascinated by. So
Yeah.
I am personally really excited to delve in today. But before we get started, I would love if you could just tell us where you are, what it's like there, just get us situated in your world.
Right now, I am in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It is cold. There's snow on the ground.
So you're snug as a bug in a rug inside.
Yeah, I've got a sweater on. I'm trying to stay warm.
You can have your cat on your lap as like a lap warmer.
Yeah, and he'll be in and out. He'll be maybe purring.
We're excited to have him here too. So before we get into the sort of depths of the interview, I always like to start with some weird and wonderful questions. They don't necessarily have anything to do with anything. They're just kind of fun for you and I to think about and for you to answer if you want to. Okay?
Okay.
Awesome. Let's do it. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why?
Mm. I guess my first reaction was gonna be Chicago because that's my favorite place. But it's so cold there sometimes. So I think maybe, like, if I could just live anywhere, it might have to be somewhere tropical. Like the Bahamas, I really love the Bahamas. Maybe the Bahamas. I think okay, yeah, final answer. It's gotta be the Bahamas.
Final answer. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to say there's no money on the other end of this question, but we'll take it. And you can always phone a friend. What is the most interesting fact you've learned recently?
Oh my gosh. I was just at the Art Institute of Chicago and I saw a very interesting exhibit of this artist. He made baskets of woven tree bark and wood, and there were all different kinds of ways to weave, and there were all different names for different patterns, and I thought it was very interesting.
That's awesome. So perfect. What is one item you couldn't live without?
Does my cat count? Is he an item? I
Well, we can get broad with our definition of item.
Okay.
Maybe we'll just
Yeah.
say one thing you can't live without.
Okay. I guess, yeah, probably my cat.
I think that's a beautiful answer. What is one thing you would never want to do again?
Ooh, I think a polar plunge because I did a polar plunge a week ago and I messed up my leg. I landed on a rock. It was horrible. I jumped in the river. It was awful. Terrible experience. I don't recommend.
Okay, would not recommend to a friend. Noted.
Yeah.
How many languages can you say hello in?
Okay. At least 3. But I feel like ciao, there's, like, variations of ciao in every language, so that's gotta be at least 3 right there. Yeah. Well, I took German in high school, so I could say hello, hello, and I'm taking Vietnamese on Duolingo right now, and they say ciao. So so that counts. I guess Spanish, hola, I could say that.
See? More than you thought.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, and this one I did include just because it's so on point. What is your favorite dinosaur?
Okay, so unfortunately, it does not have a name. Yeah, but it's the dinosaur that I described for my master's, but it's a new species and it hasn't been published yet, so it doesn't have a name yet. It is a basal sauropodomorph from Antarctica. Its nickname is Jolly Roger. I could tell you that, but it doesn't have like an official scientific name.
I feel like that's the coolest answer. The rest of us are out here being like, Velociraptor, Brontosaurus, you know,
Yeah.
and then you just whip out that. I think there should be more funny nicknames for dinosaurs, and then we could all call them things
Yeah.
like Jolly Roger.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get to hear a little bit more about that when we get to that stage.
Yeah, I think so.
I would love that. Well, thank you for being willing to answer my weird and wonderful questions. I really appreciate it.
They were very weird and wonderful. I liked it.
I'm so glad. There's no better place to start than right back at the beginning. So I would love if you could share with us, where were you born? What's life been like for you?
I was born in Lansing, Michigan, Ingham Hospital.
We're getting
Yeah,
detailed.
yeah, very detailed. I'm sorry, I don't know the room number, but it was 651 AM. Yeah. I grew up in Okemos, Michigan. I went to Michigan State University, which wasn't that far. Like all of my family went to Michigan State University, so we're all like very big Spartan family. Sort of a known thing throughout my life. Maybe just because I'm kind of a homebody as well, but like I always just knew that that's kind of where I was gonna end up, at least for college. Yeah, growing up, I was probably a weird child. Probably, like, very nerdy, I guess, which is probably my mom's fault, I think, if I had to blame anyone. She's a science teacher.
Mm.
She teaches 8th grade science, and so I think she probably influenced my interest in science and probably helped me develop curiosity. Yeah, so one of the reasons that I got into paleontology in the first place is because when I was 7, we took a family trip to Chicago, and it was just at the time that the Field Museum had bought Sue, the T-Rex. So they had this, like, huge exhibit about paleontology and what dinosaurs are and kind of just promoting this hot new T-Rex that they had. And I remember going, and I thought it was so cool. They had this, like, interactive exhibit going on. A part of it was, like, a big sandbox, essentially, and they had bones, not real bones, but just, like, models of bones that were buried in the sand, so you could just go, like, dig in the sand and then find your own bone, and I thought it was so cool. There was another station where you went and made, like, a plaster mold of the bone that you found, and then there were people that told you all you can learn about fossils and prehistoric life, and I think that was probably the first time that I learned what paleontology was or what dinosaurs were, and I thought it was really cool, and I just decided that's what I was gonna be when I grew up. I guess I turned into, like, one of those weird little dinosaur kids. I guess I haven't grown out of it. I guess I'm still a weird dinosaur kid.
Well, I'm figuring out what I wanna do when I grow up. I remember being back in high school, and there were a few people, it was actually quite a small percentage of my class that just knew what they wanted to do, and the path was there, and I remember being like, "Wow, I really wish I felt like that." I still don't know what I wanna do when I grow up, and I'm
Yeah.
36, so I'm wondering what that was like for you. I'd love to hear from your what was it like, having this sort of light bulb moment of like, "Wow, I would love to do this." And then what was that like going forward in terms of making that pathway happen?
Always like to start off by saying that I know this is very unusual, so I never want people to think that, like, they should know exactly what they want to do and stick with it because that's very unusual, and a lot of people have much different paths where they switch back and forth between all kinds of different things. But yeah, I'm just a strange case where I'm just stubborn and I just stuck with it, I guess, for most of my K-12 life in school. I forgot that I wanted to be a paleontologist and I just like didn't really think about it for most of probably middle and high school. Probably more concerned with doing cello. That was like my main activity was cello all the time. And then I thought for a little while that I wanted to be an astronomer. I got very into astronomy for a while. Yeah, and I kind of outgrew paleontology for a bit. And then in, I think, my senior year of high school, I took an earth science class and we started talking about paleontology again. And I was thinking about what my next steps were going to be because I was going to go off to college the next year and trying to figure out what am I going to do with my life. I remember we started talking about paleontology with my teacher. His name is Mr. Chapman, and he was like very encouraging and inspirational and took us on field trips and we talked about fossils. And I remembered that I was very interested in paleontology and I thought, okay, well, I guess I already decided when I was 7, so I will just do that. And then I think part of it also is that nobody really ever told me no. So I never really had doubts. And he told me the path that I would need to take to become a paleontologist. He said most people usually start with a degree in geology and then they would usually have to do a PhD to specify whatever you want to study in paleontology. And then I just decided, okay, I guess I will do that then. I went into college knowing that was what my plan was. Again, I think I was just stubborn and I stuck with it because there were definitely times when I thought, "Oh, is this really what I wanna do?" Almost switched over to archaeology, which I do wanna point out is a different thing because a lot of people confuse archaeology and paleontology, but archaeology is the study of humans, and paleontology is non-human fossils. But yeah, so basically I just like things that are old. But yeah, I almost switched over to archaeology and I didn't do it. I stuck with it and I knew that I wanted to continue on in paleontology. Once I decided what I wanted to do, I thought, okay, if other people can do it, I guess I could probably do it too.
Yeah, I love that. And I also love hearing okay, so the way that I found you, I'm just gonna tell the listeners, is that I was on social media and I'm always scouring for people who are turning their passions into their profession or their purpose or something that's making the world a better place, teaching us something, making change. That's basically what this podcast is all about. And so I came across your little side by side of the picture of you when you first
Yeah.
discovered paleontology to when was it like 20 years later or something like that? And you're about
Yes, yes.
thereabouts? Yeah, almost.
Mhm,
And it's basically you as a paleontologist saying, here
mhm,
I am, point A to point B. What I love about this conversation is that it's not that simple, right? So we look
mhm,
back on things and we're like, yeah, wow, wow, look at that. And I think it's just really cool to nod to the fact that it's not a straight path, even if you do
mhm,
know at a young age what you wanna do. To have that, as you said, that curiosity to try other things, you're not stuck. So I'm curious from
mhm,
this side of things, when you've been basically virally celebrated for basically going, from one to the other, do you feel like obviously you're very passionate about paleontology and it's what you wanna do and you're happy with where you're at. But I'm just curious about how that feels as someone who is as curious as you are, if that plays on your mind at all.
yeah. A lot of times, if I am feeling like I don't know anything at all and I need some type of encouragement, I'll think back to a lot of the positive response that I got from that tweet because it's very much not a linear path and grad school is not easy by any means. So there's always a lot of challenges to deal with and a lot of self-doubt to work through. And I think in those times, if I like really get down, sometimes I can think, "Oh no, like I'm a fraud. All these people think that I'm a real paleontologist and I actually don't know anything at all." But then I try to remember that it's not just black and white and that I can still be working on things and learning and moving forward and there's a lot of encouragement that people from all over the world have sent me, which is really crazy to think about that people in the other side of the world, like Australia or something, have seen me and have had nice things to say. It's kind of mind blowing to think of the reach that tweet has had. And it's, I guess, encouraging in maybe the darker parts of research.
And I'm curious because earlier you said that no one ever told you no. Wasn't really space for doubt growing up that you could do it. But that
Mhm.
as you've kind of gotten into these latter stages, which can be a little bit more challenging, that there is some self-doubt there. So I'm curious about your relationship with doubt. We all experience it, right?
Mhm.
And I think what I'm hearing there is a very common thing, which I too experience, which is imposter syndrome, right? It's like,
Yeah.
wait a second, like I am this thing, but I'm also all these other things, and I'm maybe not what you expect that thing to be. Like our
Mhm.
brains can just kind of take us off into all these different areas. So I'm just curious, are there things that are helpful to you when you are experiencing self-doubt? You talked about the fact that all these great comments from people across the world, like not everybody gets to experience that, and I'm really glad that you did and that you have
Yeah.
that. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that maybe you can share with people who might be experiencing self-doubt on their side.
Yeah, I think probably the most helpful thing is trying to remind myself that all of the accomplishments that I've had and everything that I've worked toward, to me, a lot of times it can just feel like sheer luck. But there has been so much work that I have put in to get to where I am now, and it can't possibly all have just been luck. And so even when I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, and you get to a stage in research where you can't just Google something. You have to figure things out on your own, and it's like the uncomfortability of not knowing is something that is horrible for me. Yeah, so when I'm feeling that way, I have to try to take a step back and try to remember where I've been and where I am now. And I wrote this like a little mantra on my desk. I have like a whiteboard on my desk, and it it says, like, in all caps, "This is what you wanted." So so I have to just, like, even when I'm at school and I'm, like, struggling with something, I just have to look at it and be like, "Okay, this is what you wanted, Lynnea. You have to keep going."
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's easy to forget all that we've done, really, in sitting down in conversations like this where people are asking you, "Oh, and then there was that. Oh, and then I did that as well." And I think that actually doing regular life reviews can be really healthy
Yeah.
as we go along and we face different times of transition, challenge, questioning, "Am I doing what I want to be doing?" Yes, I may have
Mhm,
wanted that, but do I still want it? Is also a
mhm.
really good question to ask. I think it's important to have different tools that help you through it, so it's great to hear that you have that mantra on your desk there to remind you
Yeah.
and keep you focused and keep you centered when things aren't going so smoothly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very helpful. I guess also I should mention there's that, and then also speaking to some close friends that I have who are a step further ahead than I am. That's also very helpful to me, and that kind of helps reinvigorate my spark and my curiosity because I get so deep in the weeds sometimes with the PhD and having to struggle trying to figure out what I'm gonna do, and then when you talk to somebody else who's has a job already and is at the next stage, it kind of is refreshing to realize that there's hope.
Yeah, absolutely. A friend of mine told me that if we have someone in life who's kind of a couple steps ahead that we learn from, then usually there's someone who might be a couple of steps behind us who we can help as well. So I'm curious if
Yeah.
you find that there are people who reach out to you who say, "Hey, that you're that person for them," right? It's a nice thing to think about. We're getting support, but we're also giving it.
Yeah, I have received a lot of DMs, mostly from moms. Um, a lot of moms saying that their children are very interested in paleontology and want to know what they should do to help their child pursue that interest. I've responded to many of those. And usually my advice to everyone is just take your kid to museums. And a lot of museums have programs where either like a summer camp or something like that, where kids can learn about paleontology. I love museums. That's how I got interested in paleontology in the first place. So I just love museums on a more personal level. Now I have made friends with the cohort below me. And so it's kind of strange being, I guess, a more upper level graduate student, which is new for me. I still all the time feel like I don't know anything. But I guess I do have advice to offer them as well. So I've been speaking to some of my friends about things that have helped me.
There's a healthy amount of questioning what you know, right? There's a healthy
Mm.
amount of that where you're gonna go, "Actually, do I? Do any of us know anything?" Like, that
Mhm.
is sometimes I actually find that quite grounding. We're all just out here creating lives, doing things that we're passionate about and not so passionate about, but there's still a lot of question marks in, life, the universe, and everything. So I think there's a certain healthy amount of that. But then it's also really nice to be reminded that you do have lots to share and that there are people that, are looking to you for just some guidance on guide on the side
Mhm.
energy for their own journey, and maybe they also need the Post-it note whiteboard mantra on their desk.
Yeah.
And sharing these tips and tools can be very, very helpful for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
As I was listening to you talk about reaching out to people for support, but I was also reflecting back on the teacher that you talked about. Was it Mr. Chapman?
Yeah, Mr. Chapman.
Yeah, I'm curious because I know when I've done my own sort of reflections back, there's been a couple of key characters along the way that have almost really changed the trajectory of my life, if I wanted
Mhm.
to see it that way. So I'm curious if there's anybody else in your childhood or through high school or as we kind of getting into grad school and beyond, if there's other people that have played really integral roles in your life.
Yeah. I guess I should probably complete the story of how I've gotten to where I am now. I think probably first and foremost, I should give a shout out to my mother. She is probably the most influential person and probably most supportive person that has helped me on this journey. And I probably don't say that enough. So thank you to my mother. And then I guess me getting to college. So I started my geology major. Usually paleontologists are typically in geology departments, either that or biology departments. And so at MSU, the paleontologists were in the geology department. When I started taking classes, I realized that one of the paleontologists there was actually my Sunday school teacher from my church when I was little. I hadn't realized that she was gonna become so influential in my life, but she really became like a mentor who took me under her wing. Her name is Danita Brandt, and she was actually an invertebrate paleontologist, so she worked on trilobites, and I work on vertebrates now, so I kind of went the other direction. So sorry about that to her. But she was definitely the most influential and guiding person that I had during my college years, and I did undergraduate research with her. I had opportunities to present research at conferences, and she really just kind of helped me figure out what my path was going to be. And it was kind of funny, like I referred to her as my second mom. She was like mom number 2, and everyone in my geology cohort like knew that we were like thick as thieves. Yeah, so she was incredibly and still is incredibly important to me and how I've gotten to the place that I am now. And so going into geology, I knew that I would have to go to grad school afterwards to specialize in paleontology. She kind of helped guide me and figure out what my next steps would be. She recommended that I do a master's, and I agreed because I felt like I didn't know anything because I had forgotten about paleontology for most of my K-12 life. I just felt like there were other people that were so much further ahead who can like spout off the names of all kinds of dinosaurs and just have all these facts on hand. And I felt like I didn't have that information ready. So I thought I should do a master's first and prepare myself. And then maybe I can get into a PhD and be a little more prepared. So I applied to a few different places for a master's. This part is kind of just by sheer luck and coincidence. I ended up applying to the University of Minnesota to work with Pete Makovicki, and he had just recently taken the job at Minnesota. And I applied to do a master's with him after the application deadline had already passed. It was Christmas Day of 2019. I remember I was still just trying to figure out where to apply, and I think I just looked up my research interests online, and I found that he was at University of Minnesota. I guess I'll just apply and see what happens, even though the deadline has already passed. And usually when you apply for grad school, you're supposed to, like, contact the person beforehand and have some type of correspondence so that they know if you might be a good fit. I did not do any of that. I just I just applied and then sent him an email on Christmas Day, and I was like, "Hey, just to let you know, I applied to work with you." And then that was actually the first of the schools that I heard back from, and I got accepted, like, almost immediately, which is
Wow.
insane to me. I ended up going to University of Minnesota, and the crazy part is that Pete McVicky used to be the curator at the Field Museum, and he was part of the team that helped create that exhibit when they first got Sue. So he is like part of the reason that got me into paleontology in the first place, and everything kind of just came full circle with me being able to do my master's with him. And that is how that picture of me in my 20s came about, because we went on a little research visit to the Field Museum, and I showed him that the picture of me when I was 7. I thought it looked ridiculous because I'm making, like, the weirdest face. I just wanted to show it to him because I was like, "Oh, look at me. I look crazy here. This is funny." And so we were down in the collections, and then he saw it and he said, "Oh, you should recreate it." And so he went and got the exact same bone and handed it to me and was like, "Okay, here you go. You take the picture again." So that's how that happened. But yeah, I feel very grateful being able to have that connection.
Mm. Yeah, wow, what a story. That it's so cool when things like that happen. You kinda have to just take a step back and go, "Whew."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
and so interesting that our paths cross like that, and you experience one thing that obviously he would have poured some energy into, and then that was the thing that set you on this trajectory. It's just what does it make
Yeah.
you feel when you think about that story?
I think anytime I have any doubts, that's probably the thing that I think of the most, I guess, because it really is honestly like a miracle that I have been able to achieve so many things. I'm just so grateful. It feels so special to be able to have these connections in my life. And I know that it's such an unusual story. And I think that's probably what resonates with me and probably a lot of other people as well, is that it just seems so incredible and so fortunate for me to have been able to do all the things that I have done so far.
Absolutely. I have so many questions. My brain is like, "Okay, you need to, like, bullet point these."
Yeah, maybe you need some more Post-it notes.
There's one that I'm not gonna forget, so I'm gonna ask that later
Okay.
because I can't forget it because 'cause I'm, like, forever 5 years old, and so that question will remain at the forefront right till the very end. I guess one of the things that comes up for me in hearing about your story and thinking about, the moms that have been messaging you and this sandbox experience that you had,
Mhm.
as a kid was your moment of realization. Not that it was a linear path to where you are now, but,
Mm.
a real light bulb moment for you. And I'm wondering, when we go down a pathway and we decide to become something, and you've shared this out into the world, the idea that this could be a light bulb moment for a lot of people, not necessarily that they want to become paleontologists, but they want to sort of say, oh, yeah, what am I passionate about? What would I want to follow, regardless of what age they are? But I think the other thing that comes to mind is you're representing a lot of things for a lot of people, right? By sharing this
Mhm.
story. And I would love to just hear more about what that means to you. What do you feel like you are representing to the world by sharing your story? And why do you think it resonates with people so much?
Yeah, I think probably the most obvious thing that I'm representing is being a Black woman in STEM, and I guess also in paleontology as such a small field. It's even more unusual. Most of the paleontologists, we all, at least vertebrate paleontologists, most of us all know each other because it's such a small field. And so I know like all of the other Black people because, because there's so few of us. And I think that is probably something that was really important to me when that tweet took off. Of course, I wasn't expecting it to get as popular as it did, but I think that's probably one of the things that resonated with a lot of people online. And I think that's some of the feedback that I got from commenters. And I noticed people saying, oh, this is incredible. And I want to hang a poster of this up on my classroom wall. And I just felt sort of a sense of responsibility when it became very popular, and then also a sense of pride knowing that I have become a new face in paleontology, and the stereotypical image of like an old white man in a vest is maybe changing to someone more like me. That has been something that I've appreciated, that I can help be the change and help other kids maybe envision themselves as being a paleontologist or a scientist even. And I really hope that that's the effect that I have on the younger generation. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing outreach, because children are just so excited. And I love feeding off of their excitement, and to be able to go to visit classrooms and talk to kids and talk about paleontology, it helps inspire me to do my work as well. And I hope that they can maybe envision themselves either doing paleontology or some other science as well. And it's something very meaningful to me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'd love to hear more about your outreach. How does that come about? What does that look like for you?
A few teachers in sort of my local area in Michigan have reached out and asked me to come visit their class. So I have attended a few classes and made like a little presentation on what is paleontology, sort of a simple little thing for like second and third graders. And I brought in some fossils that I have and some 3D prints. And I just kind of do a little group presentation for all of them and let them have a chance to ask me questions. And then I also did another presentation with, actually, he's my dentist. Let me give a shout out to my dentist, Gregor H.
All
Grady,
right.
DDS. But I have a kid's book, actually. He does this outreach thing where he volunteers to read at schools. And so he bought my book and gave it to the third grade class of one of these elementary schools. And I went with him to go talk to that group of kids. I did the same sort of like, what is paleontology presentation, and answered questions and showed fossils. And that is always like the most rewarding outreach experience for me, is to actually get to interact with kids who are like really excited and super interested in learning.
Well, first of all, I want to hear more about the book. But before that, I'm going to ask this question that's at the forefront of my mind as my own, 5-year-old, and also as the grown adult that I am.
Mhm.
Why do you think we are so fascinated with dinosaurs? Like, what I'm sure someone's asked you this before, but this is my first time talking to a paleontologist. So I would love to know, because we're fascinated with them, right? Like, and
Mhm.
it's a
Mhm.
global phenomena. There's movies about them. We talk about them. It's like one of those questions that you ask people,
Yeah.
even as an adult, when you meet them, you're like, "What's your favorite dinosaur?" I have asked that question many times.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious from your side, what do you think it is about dinosaurs and that period of time that we're so fascinated with?
I heard somebody say that it's because we are obsessed with gigantism. So things that are like really huge, we think that's like very interesting. But I think he's wrong. don't, I don't think that's what it is. I think it's because we, as a society, just as humans, are curious creatures, and we have always invented ideas about mythical creatures and just fantastical things. I think dinosaurs are so interesting because they fit the mold of some crazy, fantastical, mythical creature, but they were actually real. And I think it's just mind blowing to really think about something as crazy as a T Rex actually walking around your backyard. It's crazy. It's and whenever I like sit back and try to take a step away from my research and look at the fossil and be like, "Well, you were actually a real animal at one point." Like,
Mm.
it's insane. It's something that is mind-blowing and awe-inspiring to consider.
I love what you said about us being curious creatures, for sure. And I think that
Mhm.
isn't a big part of our nature is just to want to know more, whether, it is fascination with things that are gigantic or things that are extremely tiny. Um,
Mhm.
and I would say that is one of the benefits of the internet, is being able to experience all of these things and bring them more to life. But yeah, I love that answer. As you said, there's something so mind-boggling about the fact that these were real and they walked this land, and, like, you can go to places where you can stand in the footprint and you're like, "Oh my god." Like, it was very overwhelming, but also, very fascinating. I think the human gift of imagination
Mhm.
is something that, and I don't know if you agree with this, but we tend to lose as we get older. We don't practice it as much unless we're very conscious about
Yeah.
it. When we're kids, we're imagining all the time.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if dinosaurs are almost like that little, like, opening of a door to be like,
Yeah.
"Hey, let's get back into our imagination and remember that actually fun is fundamental for our well-being as humans."
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and I think probably the way that I get into that creativity sometimes is when I talk to paleo artists, because all we really have to go on is like the skeleton or maybe sometimes skin impressions, but we don't really know for sure what these creatures would have looked like, what color they would have been, things like that. And that kind of spin, the creative spin and imagination that goes into actually reconstructing what these animals would have looked like, is it really puts you in the scene and helps you imagine what our world looked like millions of years ago. And I think that's another thing that really blows people's minds, is that we can really only envision this world that we're living in right now. And
Mhm.
it's kind of hard to take a step back and realize that what we see in front of us isn't what the world always looked like. And just trying to put yourself in the shoes or footprints of some other version of our world is crazy to think about.
Hmm. I'm curious to ask, what do you hope your research will do for the world?
That is a good question.
And I also recognize it's a big question. What you're doing is extremely cool, and I think that you're inspiring the next generation to really look at all the options that are available, and say, "Okay, you are a story of like, well, she did it, so I can too," right? Like, that is one
Mhm.
big part of it, and we need it. We need kids to feel inspired and empowered to follow their dreams. I think that I feel very, very strongly about that. I think that kids are not given enough credit for how intelligent they are and that they actually have extremely good ideas. They come up with amazing solutions. I think that there are more and more platforms for that, especially within STEM. If you look at some of these competitions that schools can sign up for, I think there are many cool things that young people are coming up with, and that is very heartening for me, and that they're actually having a voice and they're out there changing the world. And you're continuing to do that with your research. So that's what made me ask that question.
It's just in general, the pursuit of knowledge is a very important thing, I think, to humanity. And learning all that we can is important. And being able to study dinosaurs is sort of a privileged position. And I understand that because it's not like I'm curing cancer or something. Studying dinosaurs is maybe a little more abstract of a science if you're, considering the hard benefits to society. But I think just the pursuit of knowledge and understanding what the world used to be like is important in and of itself. And I think for my research, especially with dinosaurs, it does more than just learning about like the teeth of sauropods, which is what I study. But that public interest also kind of fosters the interest for the next generation of scientists as well. And even if kids don't become paleontologists per se, I've heard paleontology be described as like a gateway science. And so if you're like into paleontology, then maybe you'll get into some other type of science as well, because paleontology is kind of a combination of a lot of different sciences all rolled into one. And, I had to learn coding. I've had to learn biostatistics, much to my displeasure. Yeah, but there's so many different things that go into paleontology, and so just learning about dinosaurs is also a way for people to get into other interests that they might not even know that they have.
Mm. Yeah. Well, and so it makes me ask the question about how you communicate your research. And so I'm curious about two things. One is obviously the more formal side of your research. And if you could just explain a little bit more about what those words actually mean, I would be really grateful.
Yeah.
I get it. High level, low level, bring it right down for me. And, I can't say maybe there's some really high level scientists and paleontologists listening, but for those of us in the room that are like, "I don't know the scientific name for those things," I would be grateful to know more about your research and what you're focusing on. And then the second thing I'd love to hear about is obviously we talked about you going into schools and you mentioned that you've written a book. And so I want to hear about both of those things, please, and thank you very much.
Okay. Um, let's see. Okay, so for my research right now, or I guess I can talk about my master's research as well. But I work on sauropod dinosaurs. So those are the ones that are really giant with long necks and long tails. They're quadrupedal, so they walk on all four legs, and they're herbivorous, so they eat plants. So that is my study group. And in my master's, I focused more on the ancestors of that group. So these are like the earliest ones, and they looked a lot different than what we would typically think of a sauropod to look like. So the earliest ones were a lot smaller. Sometimes they walked on two legs. They had a big evolution into what we think of as a typical sauropod. So for my master's, I described the anatomy of a new species of basal sauropodomorph. And basal sauropodomorph just means the ancestral type of sauropod. So that's the early ones. And this new species was found in Antarctica by my master's advisor, Pete Maglicki. It was found in 2010. So I did not go on the expedition, unfortunately. I was 12, and I guess they don't bring 12-year-olds to Antarctica.
Why though?
No, I don't know. I could have been useful, maybe. So I was very, very lucky in being able to work on such a cool specimen. So I described the anatomy of the skull. The technique that I used for that was CT scanning. So basically, just the same as when you go to the doctor and get a CT, we can do that for fossils and then create 3D models of all the bones. That was just an incredible opportunity to get to work on something as cool as that. And then now I'm doing my PhD at University of Michigan, and I'm working with Dr. Wilson Mantilla, and he is like the sauropod guy. So now I'm kind of transitioning to true sauropods. I'm still interested in the earlier basal ancestral ones as well. But yeah, I'm kind of switching over into what we would typically think of as sauropods. And right now I'm interested in looking at the teeth. So the dinosaur that I described for my master's had really strange teeth, and that kind of set me on this path of looking at teeth, and I've kind of become like a dinosaur dentist almost. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm looking at the orientation of the teeth and the texture of the teeth and why they look a specific way in this group of dinosaurs. That's most of what I've got going on.
So cool. Thank you for breaking that down for me. One of the things that really came to the front for me was the fact that your master's was about challenging our understanding or our image of what these dinosaurs looked like in the past, right? For what we recognize from, popular culture. And it's the same
Right.
as you're doing for paleontology and for STEM, is you're changing the image of what people have in their minds when they're thinking about these things. So I just wanted to recognize the
Mhm.
parallel because that kind of made me like, "Ooh."
Yeah.
I loved it. And it's also very, very important, right? As you said, like, this is about the
Mhm.
pursuit of knowledge, and we're always learning. And I think if you ever feel like you're done learning, you're kind of done with life. I mean,
Yeah.
we're basically here to explore and to be curious, as you said, curious creatures. And so I really enjoyed hearing about your research. I love the dinosaur dentist thing. I feel like that could be your
Yeah.
thing. I That's great marketing. I I fully
Yeah.
expect to visit your website in future and it can say the dinosaur dentist. I
I like the
very
alliteration.
Yeah, I
I
do
also
too.
am the purple paleontologist, so I guess this alliteration thing it's my thing.
Oh, it's mine too. It is mine too. I love it. You will recognize it on all of my things if I can. Usually the number like 3 things and they all start with the same letter. Favorite. Just really
Yeah.
satisfying to me. Satisfying to my brain. It's like a brain massage. I was just thinking about what you said about the teeth, and I had heard about someone commenting on, I mean, this is not to get into vegetarianism and veganism and all of that kind of stuff. But I'm curious, I had heard someone talking about our teeth as humans
Mhm.
and that they are more representative of a herbivore than they are of a carnivore. I don't know if I'm stepping into weird territory here, so please feel free to be like, "What?" But I'm just curious, as, my newfound dinosaur dentist, is there something to that?
There has been a lot of study of teeth in mammals. So a lot of times mammal paleontologists don't have as good skeletal material to work with, but you often find a lot of teeth. And so there's been a lot of description of the cusps of mammal teeth. And one of the important things with mammal teeth is that they have these really intricate patterns of grooves and lobes, and that has helped grind up food. So, like, we have differentiated teeth, like we have canines and incisors and molars and premolars. And this differentiation allows us to eat a lot of different types of food. And the grinding is especially helpful, I think, with plant material. So, I guess maybe more omnivorous.
Hmm.
I guess, I mean, our canines are not sharp at all, so they kind of function more like incisors, I guess. But yeah, so maybe omnivorous to herbivorous would be the human dietary mode.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And for anybody who started listening to this episode and are now confused as to why we're talking about
Yeah.
that is why I love these conversations because I never know where they're gonna go. So I'm curious, as you talk about the teeth that you're witnessing in these dinosaurs, what is it about them that's so different?
Sauropod teeth have wrinkled textures. So the enamel has this kind of wrinkly pattern, and it is found in a few other animals, some mammal groups, but it's just a very unusual texture, and it's something that occurs towards the beginning of the group and persists throughout most of the millions of years of their survival until they go extinct. It must have been something that was important because it stuck around for the whole length of the lineage. So I'm trying to figure out what function or purpose it might have provided for chewing or collecting food. And then also the other thing that I've kind of been looking at is the orientation of the teeth. So the teeth of many sauropods are twisted and they overlap. And it always overlaps in a very particular orientation. So it's always the front over the back teeth. And it's something that also persisted for a really long time. So it also must have had some type of benefit for biting or processing food. So those are kind of functional questions that I'm interested in and trying to figure out how does this actually work and what purpose might it have served?
Yeah, cool. Well, I look forward to learning. As I said, when I go on your website, I'm like, "Dinosaur dentist, what's she looking at now?" That's what I'm looking for. That's awesome. And so there was a second part back however many minutes ago when we were talking about communicating about science. So I'm curious for this research, what's the most accessible way for people to be learning about the forefront of paleontology and research?
There are a number of science writers, and they write for a more general public audience. So sometimes they do reviews of academic papers, kind of present it in a more easily digestible article. Those would probably be worth following if you're interested in trying to keep up with things that are being published, but you don't want to read through a whole article because those can be hard to get through. And then also there are some blogs, I think that there's especially for dinosaurs, there's a lot of people that have blogs that what is the cool new topic in dinosaurs and have new updates each week. So yeah,
Mm.
there are a few kind of outreach things for the general public that you can look for. Probably if you just Google them, you'll find them.
And then on the other side of things, as you mentioned your book, how did that come about? And just tell us your process because, it's funny, I hear so much anymore about everybody should write a book, and it can feel very daunting to even think about that. Like, even if you have a
Mhm.
topic that you're extremely passionate about, the idea of like, where would I even start? So I would just love to
Yeah.
hear about how that came about for you.
Yeah, so I have been extremely fortunate, and a lot of my, I guess, more public outreach ventures have been because of that tweet that went viral. So the tweet was seen by a publisher who has this kind of like little mom and pop publishing company, And she had a book already that she worked on with a paleontologist, and that book was called Dana Digs Dinosaurs. And that was like a cute little kids book about paleontology. But her kind of motivation was to make the book about the scientist rather than just being about the science itself. And so she featured paleontologist named Dana Cornezel, who I now am friends with. The publisher contacted me after she saw my tweet and thought that my story would make a good sequel to Dana's book. I worked with her to create the sequel called Dana Digs Dinosaurs Book 2 Meet Lynnea. Yeah, and so we created that book together, and a lot of it talks about a lot of what I'm talking about right now, actually, just how I grew up and the things I was interested in and how I started getting into paleontology and how I got into research and made connections with people all over the world. How I'm just very lucky to do all the things that I've done because of paleontology.
That's awesome. So, what kind of age group is the book meant for?
I would say probably like upper level elementary. So maybe fifth grade, something around that. There are some interesting questions about isotopes and kind of strange things like that. So I would say probably, yeah, fourth or fifth.
Amazing. Always have a million questions. It never stops. And lengthy
That's
episode.
okay. I've got answers, maybe. I don't know.
One of the things that I was thinking about with your masters, how does a dinosaur get named?
That's a good question. A lot of times when you name a new species, you'll try to correlate the name with something that has to do with where you found it. So maybe you'll have the name of the city or region as part of the species name. So when you have a scientific name, you have the species and the genus. So it's a two-part name. So maybe sometimes the species name will be like the location and the genus will be something to do with the anatomy. So usually that's what people try to do. Or sometimes you'll get things named after someone who found it or someone special to the author. It can be a lot of different choices.
So here's my question for you. I know that this
Mhm.
dinosaur that discovered in Antarctica and you wrote your master's about, and you said had a nickname, the Jolly Roger. If you could pick a name for that dinosaur, I don't know if you've even thought about it. I hope you have.
Hmm.
But if you could choose, what would you name it?
Ugh. Well, okay, so I have thought about it, and every time I think about it, I just get kind of annoyed because the obvious answer is already taken. So there's a dinosaur called Antarctosaurus, which is from, you guessed it, Argentina. Yeah. So I don't know. I've been thinking about it for some time, and I haven't really determined anything conclusive. But I feel like something to do with cold, maybe. Yeah, with Antarctica, I mean, you can probably do anything, because there's not like sometimes people like to name things after like an indigenous group. There's no people there, so you could name it after like the penguins, maybe.
That's literal that's literally what I just thought. I was like, well, maybe we could find a unique penguin name.
Yeah.
I love that so much. So I'm curious about you're doing your PhD now, and
Mhm.
what do you see for the next few years for yourself? What would you like to see happen?
Ideally, I would like to finish my PhD. I think that's gotta be number one. Um,
Totally fair.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I have maybe 4-ish years left or so. I guess that's probably a goal of mine. I would like to finally publish my master's material. Hopefully that comes out sometime soon. I would love to continue doing field work. That's one of my favorite activities. That's like the most fun part of paleontology is getting to go dig in the dirt and find cool things. I'm excited to see where my next trip will be. I don't know. traveling is one of my most favorite things. So wherever I am allowed to go next because of paleontology is what I'm most excited about.
I'd love to hear about where you've been and what trips you've already experienced, because I can imagine that this is a field of study where being out experiencing it, as you said, in the dirt, doing the
Yeah.
work. So I'd love to hear about some of your experiences of doing that.
My first dig that I ever went on was in Montana. I think that is probably the moment when I decided, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. And it's actually funny because growing up, like my whole life was not an outdoorsy person at all. And I loved the in of doors. I love being in air conditioning. I love places where there's not pollen or bugs. I just I love the inside. Everyone was always like, "Linnea, why do you wanna be a paleontologist? You have to be outside for that." And I was like, I really can't tell you." But then I went and did field work. It was just, like, so incredible to dig up a bone and realize that you're the first living being to see this creature in however many tens or hundreds of millions of years, and that, like, spark of discovery is just unbelievable, and I guess it overpowered the being outside part. And I fell in love with it. So, yeah, that was my first experience in Montana with this field camp. So you can pay to go experience a dinosaur dig with this course that I took actually. So you can go as just a regular person and pay to go to camp and dig up dinosaurs. And they also had a college course where you could learn about field methods for paleontology. So I took it as a course. I just fell in love with it there. And then when I went to my master's advisor does field work all the time and all over. And so he took me and my lab all over the place. We went back to Montana, we went to Utah, we went to Wyoming, we went to Missouri, which is a really strange one because normally you find dinosaurs out west, and Missouri is not at all what you would think of for a typical spot to find dinosaurs. And probably my biggest adventure was he took us to Argentina, and that was something that I had dreamed about since high school because I saw the PBS show that was talking about Patagotitan, which is one of the biggest sauropod dinosaurs that ever existed. And it was talking about the discovery of that dinosaur in Argentina. And ever since I saw that, I wanted to go to Argentina. And then my master's advisor took me there, and I got to go dig in the field. And it was just like a dream come true. And then I just went to Argentina again for my PhD research, but this time was for collections visits. So I went to museums and got to see like all of the fossils that are in the collections and play with them and look at them and meet the people that were in that PBS show. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy.
Oh, well, I loved hearing you talk about that. And, there was like two kind of things came up for me was I think that the best parts of life are both the big things and the little things. So wonderful to be able to witness someone talking about their dreams coming true and to hear stories like that. And there are lots of them. We just tend not to focus on them because there's so many other things happening. And so it's why I like to highlight when there are stories like this, because dreams don't have to be big and gigantic. They can be small as well. They can come in many, many different shapes and forms, but it's just so beautiful to witness you talking about it and seeing how excited you are, and also living in that space of gratitude and awe for what's happened for you throughout your life and what's coming next. I think the other part that I loved about that story was remaining open to change. When you find something that you're really passionate about, it can transform you in ways that you never expected were possible, getting you totally outside of the indoor comfort zone, out into all of these things that otherwise you would have probably not chosen. Passion opened that door for you, so maybe you can find a bit of a balance of both.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have had sort of a evolution of acceptance for the outdoors.
Let's be clear about the fact that that was an acceptance and not like a love.
Yeah, yeah. I love to look at it, and I love to hike occasionally. It's just the sleeping in a tent for weeks on end, not my favorite thing.
Honesty is the best policy.
Yeah, but for Argentina, I'll do it.
Well, I'm so grateful that we got to have this conversation today. Listening to you talk about your dreams, I have actually always wanted to talk to a paleontologist. So this is like, as I said, dreams don't have to be gigantic. They can be small as well. But this was
Yeah.
tick off the life list for me that has a big impact because yeah, that I got to ask some of the questions I've wanted to know since I was a kid. And it has been
Excellent.
so wonderful to satisfy my curiosity, but also pique it at the same time. I'm like, I
Yeah.
have so many more questions, but we can't have a 5-hour episode. So I'm like, Jen, rein it in. You know, that big hook comes off the side of the
Yeah.
stage. But I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your story, and for inspiring so many people. It's been really wonderful to watch the reach that you've had and the impact that
Yeah.
you're having on the next generation, sure, but also across the generations, challenging the way that we see things both in the past and the present and going into the future, opening up bigger possibilities for what the world can look like environmentally and societally. I think it's just a really exciting story to tell. And I'm grateful that we got to tell it on this podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you telling my story.
Yeah. And you're not done yet. I have two more questions.
Oh, excellent.
Just when you thought you were about to escape. So, as you know, I asked you to choose a cause for the recreation donation this month. And so
Yeah.
I would love if you could share with the listeners what cause you've chosen and why.
I have chosen the Los Angeles Food Bank to help with disaster reliefs from the fires in California. That was just a really terrible disaster that happened. And one of my best friends' parents live in that area, actually. And luckily, they're okay. But it just kind of gave me a firsthand account of how much damage happened. And so I really feel for all of the people who are going through a really tough time and especially who have lost everything. So that was really important for me.
Wonderful. So there'll be links in the show notes for everybody if you'd like to join me in donating. And just thank you for choosing that cause. And I look forward to supporting it.
Excellent.
And we have one final question. It's the one question that I ask every single guest, and it's my favorite. So
Okay.
if you're ready,
I hope so. Okay.
what do you think is the meaning and purpose of life, the universe, and everything?
Oh, simple. Okay. I think if you were to ask like a evolutionary biologist or paleontologist from like a strictly science perspective, they'd probably say reproduction. It's just continuing the species. But I don't want to give that answer. That's okay. So I take it back. That's not my answer. I think me as Lynnea would probably just say to have a good time and, and do good also. Yeah. So I guess there's that saying of leaving things better than you found it. So trying to make the most of your own experience and also make other people's experience better as well.
I will take both of those answers as having space here, but I'm glad you clarified which was yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you again for your time today, Linnea. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation as well.
This month's recreation donation is in support of the Los Angeles Regional Food Bank. As you now know from exploring with Linnea and I in this episode, this is a charity focused on providing food and other essentials to people in need. serving hundreds of thousands of individuals every month. They are currently supporting more people than ever following the 2025 wildfires. They are welcoming financial donations, accepting volunteers, and looking for donations of both food and non-food items to help all of those affected by the fires and beyond. Whether you can volunteer your time, money, or your voice, we hope you'll head over to our website to find out the different ways that you can support their unique version of recreation for the world. Please take the time to let us know what the stories we explored in this episode meant to you. And if you do take action to support this month's cause, thank you. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Recreation to Recreation. If you or someone you know has a unique and inspiring story to tell, make sure to reach out so we can share it with the world. Until next time, keep experiencing, keep expanding, and keep exploring.